I am so thrilled that it is time to move on to our next presenter, and I have the distinct honor of introducing Dr. Cynthia Clark. Dr. Cynthia Clark is an award-winning tenured professor, clinician, scholar, and author, and the founder of Civility Matters. Her pioneering work on fostering civility has brought national and international attention to the controversial issues of incivility in academic and practice settings. Her theory-driven interventions, empirical measurements, theoretical models, and reflective assessments provide best practices to prevent, measure, and address uncivil behavior and create healthy workplaces around the globe. Dr. Clark's current research includes preparing nurses to address incivility in the practice setting, bridging the education practice gap to create positive work cultures, designing and testing empirical instruments to measure and address incivility, integrating civility, inclusivity, and professionalism into nursing curricula, and conducting intervention studies to measure the effectiveness of cognitive rehearsal as an evidence-based strategy to address incivility, build high-forming teams, and protect patient safety. Dr. Clark is a prolific researcher, presenter, and author whose presentations number in the hundreds and whose publications have appeared in a broad range of peer-reviewed and open access venues. Her empirical measures have been translated into 16 languages and used by scholars in more than 30 countries to measure incivility and to foster healthy workplaces. She is the recipient of numerous teaching, research, and service awards, including as a third-time recipient of the Most Inspirational Professor Award, the NLN Education Excellence in Educational Research Award, the Journal of Nursing Education Christine Tanner Scholarly Writing Award, the Nurse Educator K.T. Heinrich Writing Award, the prestigious Elizabeth Russell Belford Award for Excellence in Nursing Education, awarded by Sigma Theta Tau International, and the John P. McGovern Lectureship Award, conferred by the American Association of Colleges of Nursing. Dr. Clark has been honored as a distinguished lecturer scholar at 12 universities. Her book, Creating and Sustaining Civility in Nursing Education, received first place honors as the 2013 AJN Nursing Book of the Year. The second edition is now available. It is a must read for all educators and healthcare professionals. And Dr. Clark is working on another publication to be published within the first quarter of next year. It is my distinct pleasure to introduce Dr. Cynthia Clark.
Oh gosh, thank you very, very much. Wow, thank you, Dr. Hedges. I certainly appreciate that. What a great presentation you just did, and I could really resonate with much of it. It's so interesting, you know, particularly in the area where I spend a good deal of my time, which is, you know, helping create these civil healthy work environments that not only are we struggling with incivility in our academic and clinical areas, but I can attest, having several organizations reach out, businesses of all kinds, community organizations, I'm speaking with neighborhood groups. This is an issue that touches all of our lives. And I think what's happened, at least in my estimation and my perspective, talking with people really far and wide, is that we are struggling a lot more since the COVID pandemic. And initially what we saw, and I'll get into my talk in just a moment, but your session touched me in that regard, that what we saw initially when COVID hit in a very big way is that we saw a little bit less of incivility, and we saw a growth in teamwork and collaboration But it was short-lived because of many of the things you talked about, which is the stress that we are all under in our various fields and in our various countries and in our various systems. So we know unequivocally it can be measured. It has been measured. This is something I've been measuring for the last 20 years and multiple other scholars, the connection between stress and incivility, which we'll talk just a little bit about. But you also suggested to the folks who are participating today to think about how your talk pertained to their particular organization. And I'm going to ask that you do the same here, because not everything will jive for every single organization, but many of these principles I think will and do apply. I wanted to say one more thing about your session. When you talked about the Bridges transition model, I happen to really ascribe to that, and it's been clear. All you have to do, at least pick up the Chronicle of Higher Ed if you're talking about academics, you know, some of our professional organizations, you know, in whatever country we reside, that we are not taking the time that we need to take as healthcare workers and healthcare professionals to grieve what we've left behind. We just move headstrong into the next thing, the next task, what needs to be done, rather than really giving ourselves permission and time to, you know, grieve that, to experience that before we move on to those next phases. So that also resonated with me. One more thing. Related to Bridges, one of the things that I've been asking now, I have hundreds of people, maybe even a couple thousand now, that I have asked to, in one word, if they could describe in one word, and then I have them do a word cloud anonymously, one word, how would you describe what has happened to you with your personal experience? How would you describe that experience, or what you have encountered since the COVID pandemic hit, at least in the United States, March 2020? 3 words keep popping up in huge ways in that word cloud. The first one, and these are academic practice and students, so it's a wide array of people. And number 1, overwhelmed. People say, I'm just overwhelmed. You know, there's so much to do. The second is utter exhaustion. People are exhausted. And then the third, and I wonder, because I do this anonymously, I don't know for sure, but my sense is that the third word which pops up is feeling isolated. And I wonder if that has something to do with our students, our learners, our faculty. Maybe it's all of us, but I know that students will often say, I just feel so alone and disconnected. And the recent Gallup poll, when students were polled, asking, what is it that you want from your professors? Connection, engagement, encouragement. That's what they're asking for. So anyway, I probably took up a little bit too much time there, but I really wanted to just kind of, you know, relate to some of the things that you talked about. Tarek, I'm going to ask you when I need to stop for time's sake so that I don't go over my time. Can you tell me?
You got it. You got it. So you have about 35 minutes?
35.
Yes.
All right. So let's go for it. Okay. So first of all, I want to thank you all. I want to thank the ResearchGate. I want to thank you all for being here. But I mostly want to thank you for the work that you're doing every single day in whatever realm you are in to improve the lives of others. And I think that gratitude is one of the things that we sometimes are in short supply of. So I just want you to know how grateful I am for you. And I know that the people in your lives are tremendously grateful for you. So with that, my topic today is Civility Rising, Strategies to Foster Healthy Work Environments and Cultures of Belonging. This is something I can talk about for about a week. So having 35 minutes, I'll do my best to crest the waves, if you will. So today what we'll talk about is, what do we mean by civility? What do we mean by incivility? What is the impact of these behaviors, not only on us as individuals, but our teams, our organizations, and certainly patient care? And then we'll have time to just talk about a few strategies. And if I have enough time, I've brought forward a scenario that I would like to show you about how we might specifically address uncivil behaviors. So let's go ahead and begin with talking about, what do we mean by civility? What does that even mean? Why are we even having the conversation? And because different terms mean different things to different people, I thought it was really important that we spend a moment saying, you know, what are these concepts, so that we can do a little bit of foundational work and level setting. So what's really interesting and what I'm excited about is my research team and I, one of them, just completed and submitted for publication a concept analysis on civility. The original one was published by myself and a colleague back in 2008. So in 2020, I'm thinking, I wonder what's changed, what's different. And when we did the review of the literature, what was tremendously cool, I think, is that what changed a lot from 2008 to 2020 was the fact that our body of work has grown really significantly. And we were able to get not only a multidisciplinary perspective, but an international one, because there were 18 countries, authors and scholars that we were able to read deeply and widely about. And what we discovered is that when we're talking about civility, what we're really talking about here is we're making a choice to engage in a respectful way in order to create a connection, a relationship, or an engagement, to understand and to learn from each other's point of view. And that occurs especially perhaps when we disagree. So many scholars would say that civility is synonymous with respect. Now, I believe that there's a lot of interface there between civility and respect. There's a few other nuances, but when we think about respect, it's important to think, okay, what in fact does that mean? And so one idea that I'll put forth is that respect really means that we have a regard that's genuine for the feelings, the perspectives, the thoughts, the wishes, the well-being of other people. You know, that we really do want to listen, to understand, listen to learn. And as I mentioned a moment ago, particularly maybe at times when we disagree. So that means that if we can resolve conflicts, and we like conflict, we just need to do it in such a way that we create a positive synergy to create new ideas and new ways of doing things. And I thought you might be interested in this quote about respect, and it comes from the authors of Crucial Conversations. I really like it. I was on an airplane one day when I was rereading Crucial Conversations, and this just jumped out at me. And I'm like, I need to really share this quote because I think it's so powerful, which is, respect is like air. If you take it away, that's all we can think about. So think about that. When you're treated badly, rudely, affronted, microaggressed or microassaulted. What we want to do is protect ourselves. And so the author suggests that the instant we perceive disrespect, the interaction is no longer about the original purpose. It's now about defending our dignity. So I think that that is really a powerful sort of view of what we mean when we are disrespected or treated in an uncivil way. And so let's sort of think about, what do we mean then by incivility in other workplace aggressions? And to do that, I want to introduce you to my revised continuum of what I call the continuum of workplace aggression, previously called the continuum of incivility, which I created back in 2009. Now, because our time is short today, my intent is not at all to go through all this and to break it down and deconstruct it, but to give you a visual of how there can be a progression along this continuum of behaviors that might occur in a workplace, all the way from nonverbal behaviors through microaggressions, bullying, up to and including tragedy, which could include, of course, something as awful as a campus shooting or a hospital shooting. And what we know is whatever behavior occurs along this continuum, when we don't address it, bad things can happen, worse things can happen, more harm can happen. And we know factually that these behaviors, when we are on the receiving end, can have a significant impact on all domains of wellness, whether that's psychological, physiological, emotional wellness, spiritual wellness, sometimes even financial wellness. So just a few examples is if we think about nonverbals, which we see way at the left of the continuum when we say, well, those are maybe the least offensive, but we know things like eye rolling and finger pointing and door slamming and waving our arms and all of those things, or walking away from a conversation, though we haven't said anything, we have shouted in so many other ways. And more overt kinds of behaviors like spreading rumors, negative gossip, microaggressions, microassaults, name callings, putting us down for whatever reason, our race, our ethnicity, our gender, our weight, our religion, you name it, any number of ways that people can treat other people badly. And I'll also mention the posting of insulting comments on digital and social media sites, which is growing not only in academic arenas, but clinical arenas as well. And it's important to recognize that incivility is not only what we do, but what we don't do. That means when we stay silent, when we don't speak up, when we fail to acknowledge or support a coworker, or we ignore or we marginalize people, or we withhold important information or vital information, all of that, particularly if we're in the patient care area, can result certainly in harm or death to a patient, or workplace or worker safety in the workplace. And so what are some of those contributors? Well, we know that at the top of the hit parade is stress. Stress in numerous ways that has been really accelerated and morphed and grown as a result of the pandemic in all of its myriad manifestations. But we also know, and Dr. Hedges addressed some of this, that complexity of care. It's not like the olden days where it's very clear and you have a clinical pathway and boom, you've helped that patient achieve wellness or better health. The acuity, the competing external mandates. Gosh, I'll tell you, I just worked yesterday with a group of a surgical team out of California, from surgical techs through surgeons, and what they're really dealing with on that day-to-day basis in that perioperative area is mind-blowing. And so all of us, with our demanding workloads and all of the other things that might happen. And why do we avoid it? This is one of the things that I've been studying for years now, because I find it so incredibly interesting about why people avoid dealing with incivility. Because one of the questions that I've asked from a research perspective for a very long time is, do you avoid dealing with these uncivil events? And I have to tell you that no matter which group that we do the assessments in, my team and I, is that more than 80% of the time, people do not address it on a regular basis. Now, does that mean that they never address it? No, sometimes they do. But the majority will say, I pretty much don't address it. So then the question becomes, why aren't we addressing it? And the number one reason that I see in the work that we've done and other scholars is this fear of retaliation, particularly if it's personal or professional, like in the academic world. That plays out a lot around promotion and tenure issues. It just does. Or in the clinical world, how that plays out. You know what? If I address this, I'm going to get the worst shifts. I'm not going to get the time off I want. I'm going to have to be relegated to some of the crappiest, workload, and on it goes. Other reasons, some say, it makes it worse. There's no roadmap or policy for me to follow. But what I find, and I know it's listed last there, but people will say, I don't know how to do this. I don't have the skill set that it takes to be able to deal with issues when they occur. And furthermore, I struggle with it, they say, if in fact there's a power differential. So if I'm a nursing professor and I need to have a conversation with a colleague that's a peer, that's one thing. But if I have to address my dean, that's a totally different thing. Same thing in the patient care area, and we're seeing these dynamics also play out in businesses, not just healthcare businesses, and as I said, neighborhood and community groups. And we know that there's a detrimental impact. We know it. The body of work that is growing in terms of the link between incivility and the impact on patient outcomes is really pretty scary. We know that when these behaviors occur, they compromise patient safety, quality of care. It impairs our ability to perform, to think in a more clinical and judging way. It heightens our moral distress, lowers resilience, heightens burnout. We know these things, and it increases our vulnerability to physical and mental health. And what wasn't in my bio, I know that's such a long bio, I'm sorry about that, but what wasn't in my bio is that I'm a behavioral health nurse. I'm an adolescent and family therapist and specialist. And the idea of the impact on our physical and mental health from the COVID pandemic, and certainly even before that, all happening when we are experiencing a worldwide mental health crisis. So what we want to do, of course, is build these cultures of civility and psychological safety. Now, that begs the question about psychological safety, and I want to just mention maybe a project that you are all aware of. If not, I'll mention it here. So back in 2012, so almost 10 years ago, Google launched the Project Aristotle. Project Aristotle was launched by Google to try to figure out what makes a high performing team. What are those elements? So they conducted this multi-year initiative to identify the characteristics of an ideal work team. They studied about 180 teams, but no matter how they analyzed the data, it was almost impossible to find patterns in terms of the composition of teams. But then they started to look for norms or traditions of that team, or standards, or the unwritten rules that govern how we function as a team when we gather. And it was very interesting because they found certain norms that were certainly important, like creating a culture where we can depend on one another and so forth. But the number one in the Google study, which was very robust, Project Aristotle, was psychological safety. That was the number one component of high performing, high functioning teams. And so when we think about psychological safety, perhaps you have availed yourself of the work of Amy Edmondson, whose work is just absolutely exquisite in this area. And what we mean when we're talking about psychological safety is having an environment where we feel like we are comfortable to speak up, to share ideas, to ask questions, to raise concerns, and not only comfortable, but obligated. That it means we trust one another, we respect one another, we can be candid with one another. If we make a mistake, we can ask for help without fear of being ridiculed or embarrassed, or any number of things that sometimes happen when, Dr. Hedges mentioned imposter syndrome. I hear that a lot from students and other workers, by the way. So when we're talking about psychological safety, what we want and ways to do that is that it's really about building trust, to be honest, to tell the truth, to act with integrity, to build relationships, to get to know one another. If you know me and I know you, it's less likely, really know something about me that I'm willing to share with you on a personal level as your teammate. And if you reciprocate that, I think there's a less likelihood of us being uncivil with one another, because we are building relationships. And so it means maintaining confidences, doing what we say we're going to do, and the list goes on. So we know that what we need to do first, before we really build the cultures within our workplaces, we got to take a look at ourselves. What about us? And as Socrates said, an unexamined life is not worth living. So we really need to evaluate how it is that I'm coming across to other people. And we sometimes think we're coming across just fine, but we don't always know that. And I love this quote, to know yourself, you must sacrifice the illusion that you already do. You must sacrifice the illusion that you already do. So we need to adopt and maintain and have a growth mindset, that we can learn and discover and grow in our emotional intelligence and our ability to understand not only ourselves, but to relate to one another. And so I often talk about being a civilist or a civility champion. This is somebody who consistently models the attributes of a civil, respectful person, who honors diversity and inclusivity, who exhibits principled character, responsible citizenship, and not only respects, but invites the perspective of others and really creates that genuine sense of belonging. And I often say, and so I'd like you to think about this, I often say this: we are all role models. We are all role models, but what are we role modeling? How do we show up? How do we make ourselves available? How do we speak? How do we act? How do we conduct ourselves? That is all very, very important. When we're thinking about creating workplaces that are healthy, we need to begin with ourselves. And we need to be building high-performing teams. And I love the work of Simon Sinek. If you haven't read some of his works, I invite you to do so. He talks about how we establish and create our life purpose, what he calls our why. He said that we can have an individual why, we can have an organizational why, we can also have what he calls a tribal why, or a team. How do we function as a team? And he suggests that a team is not a group of people who work together. A team is a group of people who trust one another. And that's that container, that safe space, that brave space of psychological safety, where all of us can speak up and be responsible and accountable to one another. One of the ways that we can do this, and I got to tell you, I'm often asked this question. They say, okay, what's the magic potion? What's the secret sauce to creating and sustaining healthy work environments? And of course, that's not a simple answer. It's messy, it's confusing, it's complex, it's dynamic, it's ever changing, and every situation is different. But I often say, if you do nothing else in your workspace, that you and your team to create a charter, a commitment to coworkers with team agreements or norms about how you are going to interact and behave with one another, and furthermore, how we will hold ourselves accountable to that charter or that contract that we build with one another. I was one time talking with a group of nurse practitioners across the United States at a national conference, and we were talking about the importance of team charters and norms and team agreements. And it was very interesting because one of the nurse practitioners said, and she was from Texas, and she said, we were super struggling in our ICU. It was disastrous in terms of our team functioning and team performance. She said, our team got together and we created what she called the power of we, or the 10 commandments of the ICU. And she shared those with us. And she said it was a game changer because we now knew what was expected, what those behaviors needed to be for us, not only to function as a high performing team, but to be able to deliver on optimal patient outcomes. So we build our skills. This is where I spend a good deal of my time, is talking about what do we mean by some of these? How do we promote emotional intelligence, self-awareness, but also how do we communicate well with one another? How do we resolve conflict in a respectful way? And so a lot of times people will call those soft skills, the soft skills of communication, conflict negotiation. And that troubles me because they are not soft. I call them power skills. They are difficult. I don't know what just happened to my slides, but they are difficult to achieve because every single context is different. I'm going to see if I can go back to my slide deck here. I don't know what happened to my slides. Hello? I'm gonna try to go back to my.
Yes, you're trying to go back?
I'm trying.
Okay. Can you just quit and open it back again?
Somehow it shut down, Tarek. I'm gonna have to open my deck again and go, oh, that's not it.
Okay, it's right there. Is it the one?
Because I could go ahead without slides, but there's one that I absolutely need to show. So let me go grab it. How much time do I have?
You still have time. You still have time. You have a lot. You have like another 20 minutes.
Oh, I was flying then.
No, you have another 20 minutes.
Let me go. I apologize for that. I don't know. I think
No problem. No problem.
I think our Zoom had a hiccup there.
Let me see here if I can get it for you here.
No, that's okay. Let me go ahead and share. I'm going to share. Okay, I think we're going to be golden here.
Okay.
Very good.
Okay, are we on the slide I
Here
was
we
on?
go. Here we go. Yes.
Yes.
Okay, so again, these are not easy, as you know, because every single encounter is different. The environment's different. The people involved are different context, different tone. You know, we can say the same word or the same phrase in a different tone. Like if I say to you, thanks, Tarek, or I say, thank you, Tarek, or I say, thanks a lot, Tarek. See how the tone can change. The message being delivered can be quite different, even though the words are the same. So these skills, when we're addressing conflict or attempting to communicate effectively, they require a lot of practice, and more practice. Because talking about the problem just isn't enough. What I like to do is do a lot of role play with debriefing and looking at situations that people are dealing with in their own work settings so that we can get more practiced or improve our ability to deal with patient safety situations as well as interpersonal relationships. So this is a cycle that I've been working on because all of us on this call know that if we are treated badly, if we are disrespected, if we are affronted, if people, you know, attack our person, physiologically, we are hardwired neurologically to either fight or flight. When those things happen, when we have those affronts, we know that our amygdala begins to fire. Our amygdala, which is the emotional part of the brain, takes over, and we have less control over the prefrontal part of that brain. Meanwhile, all these hormones are surging. Remember the quote from Crucial Conversations that when we have that affront, all we can think about is what's happening to us. Now, as healthcare professionals, we can't afford to either fight or flight. We can't, because what if it's a patient safety situation? So this looks like a simple model, but it really isn't. But here's how it kind of works. So let's say that you are affronted and treated badly. One of the things that we want to do is to be able to come back to neutral as much as possible with our physiological being and presence. So it might mean taking a deep breath. It might mean putting shoulders back just a little bit, taking on a relaxed, body posture and so forth, so that we can begin to neutralize that effect a little bit. And because the human brain is so amazing, we're not just resetting. So that's sort of the reset. I'm going to reset, but almost simultaneously, I'm reflecting. And so when I'm talking about reflecting, using a cognitive strategy, I think I mentioned that I'm a cognitive therapist. So I like to use cognitive strategies, and I have found that they're very effective. And I've taught these a lot to my students and other groups, that as we're resetting, we reflect. And one of the ways that we can reflect is to ask ourselves a question, this quiet and silent question. The question that I like to use, and you can develop your own question, but as I'm reflecting on this situation that's occurring, I'm asking myself, does this situation call for a response? If so, can it wait? If not, or do I need to address it now? So can it wait, or do I need to address it now? Well, if it's a patient safety situation, you bet, I have to address it now. And there are a lot of evidence-based ways that we can do that. The one that comes most to mind is from Team Steps and the models that they've created to address a patient safety situation. But I wanted to introduce you. Oh, and so then the third part is so that we can relate. We reset, we reflect so that we can relate. And sometimes we don't need to address it right away. And a lot of times I would recommend that maybe we don't. Maybe we think about what our approach might be. And I want to introduce you to just one approach using an evidence-based strategy, and it's called the PALE communication strategy. And it was developed by the Harvard Center for the people that work at the Harvard Center for Medical Simulation. And if you're interested, so the Clark and Fay publication there, that's Mary Fay. She, for a long time, was with the Harvard Center for Medical Simulation. We published a paper last year on how to use PALE, particularly for educators working with students. And so I'm going to just go through the model really quick. But the biggest thing about PALE and why I love it, even though there's a lot of different ways to approach uncivil behaviors, is that it's based on listening, and it's also based on what's called the basic assumption. The basic assumption essentially means that we assume goodwill, we assume the best of others, we assume that our learners, if you will, come to us and have a desire to do their best. They want to learn. So it's really making that psychological adjustment in our own minds. And so preview means that we're going to let that individual know what we want to talk about right out of the gates. Advocacy 1, we're going to be very clear about what we saw or we noticed or we heard. We will express our concern or our thought about what occurred. And my personal favorite are the inquiry and listen, which is I'm going to pose a question that is based on that assumption of goodwill. And then I'm going to listen. I'm going to listen because I can assume a whole lot of stuff about one of my students or one of my colleagues or even one of my family members. I can assume all that. I can make up a story even, because that's often what we do. But if I really want to listen to understand, I will ask a question and then listen. So I put together a little scenario here, and then I'm going to show you an example of how you can apply PALE. So Ella is an experienced nurse who has made it abundantly clear that she has little or no patience when it comes to dealing with new or experienced personnel. Kiana is a new team member, reaches out to Ella, asking for help with a patient situation. And Ella says very rudely, I don't have time to deal with newbies. I've got more important things to do. Now, this is a true scenario, by the way. Maybe you've experienced it yourself, but Kiana decides that she's going to request to have a conversation with Ella. And of course, you want to do this when you're not in the middle of patient care activities and where you can find some quiet and uninterrupted time. So here's what Kiana might say. And I always like to start with a name because it makes a connection and it helps us relate to people. So Kiana says something like this, you know, Ella, I'd like to talk about our working relationship. Boom, there it is. Objective, clear. Ella's very, clear about that. I've noticed your reluctance to discuss patient care issues with me. I'm concerned that our lack of teamwork will affect patient care. What are your thoughts about my concerns or my observations? And then Kiana listens. I have to tell you this, that very often in these situations, Ella might say something like, you know what, you caught me on a day when I was super stressed. It wasn't right. I need to apologize for that. So that's not always going to happen. But in the vast majority of cases, when we respectfully engage and address folks and ask for their observations and their input, and we really listen, which is one of the most exquisite gifts we can give one another, is that gift of listening and that gift of our time. People often respond in a positive manner. So I'm going to be closing up here. I think I'm almost out of time. Maybe we'll have time for a question or a comment or two. But I just want to mention that the stress of incivility changes us. It just does. And as a behavioral health nurse, I have to tell you, I mentioned before how near and dear this topic is to my heart, because healthcare workers all over the world are experiencing incredible, prolonged and heightened levels of stress to the extent that we are burning out. We are seeing higher levels of substance abuse, suicide rates. These are very, very serious issues that pose significant issues, not only for us personally and our colleagues, but our organizations and society. So I believe personally that the need for civility and us respecting one another and building, learning, and work communities that are healthy has never been greater. So I'll leave you with this quote, and it goes like this: that in a world where you can be anything, be kind. In a world where you can be anything, be kind. Thank you very much. And I'm going to stop sharing now.